Hey everybody, it's Corey, and I just finished up a session and I just wanted to pop in because we've had some questions and I just wanted to kind of answer and show how I walked through this with my student. So all of our students are definitely very different. They have different needs and they might need different supports. And so I love all of the questions about, adding this or supplementing with that. Absolutely, absolutely. We all have students who have different needs. And so um, my business coach had said something that I was like, oh, this is perfect. Yeah, this is exactly it. And he said, my goal is to be the bumpers for you if we are bowling, to kind of keep you on track and to keep you moving in the right direction, but not to totally guide everything and not to completely say, this is exactly what you need to do and move over here and shift over here, but rather to kind of keep you in a lane. And so with the lessons, the idea or the goal is to keep you in the lane and to keep you moving in the right direction, but not to completely decide in what direction that's going to go, right? We're not going to hit it right in the middle every single time. And that's okay. That's okay. That's really kind of our goal. And that's what keeps intervention fun, at least for me, is that all of our students keep us guessing and they all kind of keep us on our toes a little bit. And so one of the things that I wanted to walk through is we have students who often can't get through a whole lesson, and that's okay. They're not meant to necessarily get through the whole lesson. So a lot of times we'll break different pieces up. And so, for example, for this student, I did all of the reading section last week, and then we did all of the writing section this week. So typically, if I'm going to break it up that way, I still usually start at the beginning so that we can still go through the sound deck, or basically our sound drill, so that we can go through that. I'm just telling him, hey, before we get into spelling, we're going to warm up our eyes so that we can be prepared for this. And meanwhile, I'm data tracking. So when I'm data tracking, I'm tracking his sound drill again. So because I gave the sound drill again, I'm going to go ahead and track how he did with that and just see how he did. Again, it was the exact same sounds as last week. So how did he do in comparison to last week? Then we may go through kind of just a couple of the quick review, or just talking about, different pieces that we noticed as we were working through with our keywords, and just dropping different pieces. And a lot of that I'm teaching because it is sort of a drop the E when you're adding a vowel suffix, or it's things like that that they need to know. And so we are covering it as we're going through the lesson. So then what we're going to do is we are going to jump right into our phonological awareness for spelling. So usually that's where I'll cut, is we're going to jump right in for our warm-up here. And so we're going through all of these different pieces, and I want him to see the connection between when we're thinking about how many words do we hear. As we're writing sentences, we need to know, for example, if we were working on miss and dis, I have a lot of my students asking me, is dislodge 2 words? Well, we had just talked about dis being a prefix, so is that 2 words? No, it's 1. And this is important, and it's why we sort of think sentence segmenting is very elementary, but it's not, because once we start looking at morphology and we start looking at that, kids start to drop it off a little bit. So it's really important that we look at that. So we're going to look at that. Are these words the same? Mocking, knocking. I'm always trying to kind of pull things that are similar. And we have examples in the instructor manual, but if you have a student who's struggling with specific sounds, give them the opportunity to discriminate between those sounds that they're struggling with. What's the sound, or what in this case is the suffix in bend-able? And so then I'm saying, great, we're going to spell able, A-B-L-E. Ibble is I-B-L-E. Then we would not know how many syllables, how many sounds. And the reason is this is so important for spelling. It's so, so important, because what we need to do is we need to start mapping our phonological awareness onto our orthography. So this is where we're really starting to map that phonological awareness onto orthography. One of the biggest things, one of the biggest problems that I had with some of my phonological awareness programs that I was using in isolation is that it's great to build phonological awareness skills, but students have to make the connection of why. Why? So we know that phonological awareness does not include any letter mapping. It doesn't. However, if we leave that off, students don't always make that connection. So they might get better at phonological awareness without actually getting better at reading and spelling. So it's really important that we connect that. This is where we're doing that. And this is why we wanted to break our phonological awareness into reading supports and spelling supports. So what we want to do after we've done our auditory drill where they've mapped on the sounds is we want to move into spelling. I had my student who was really struggling. He was really struggling with these words, and he wasn't getting them even close. And so because of that, I needed to take a step back. And so we needed to go back to why did we just do the sounds and the letter mapping to come to spelling. So what I did is I just real quick inserted a slide. So I just did exactly what Michaela showed, where we just inserted a blank slide, and I copied and pasted all of these letters down here. So I just dragged like this, and I did Control C, and then on my new slide, I did Control V. And that way, real quick, I had all of my letter options. And so then what I did is the word for him first was, that he first struggled with was publishing. So then what we did is we asked, okay, let's think about all of our different sounds in the word. So before we even get into it, let's think about how many syllables do we hear in publishing? And then I just made a box. So I just came up here and I made a box. And he was able to say 3. We have 3 syllables, because again, we're going back to what did we just do here? How many syllables? 3. Great, so we're gonna have 3 boxes, pub, lish, ing. So then I asked him, what's the suffix that you hear? What's the ending? Suffix? Publish, ing. So then we pulled up the ing, and we would just put it right here in this box. We made it a little bigger. You can just make it a little bigger by pulling it. Sometimes you have to send things to the back. So sometimes when you make new shapes, if you make a fill color as opposed to, let's see here, like you can go into your shape format. If you make it no fill would be the recommendation, because if you fill it white, then your stuff goes to the back. But ing, and so then I said, great, how many sounds do we hear in pub? And I made him pull up, see these ones. This is exactly what I was saying. This is what happens if you don't make it no fill. So what I would always recommend if you're gonna make shapes is just go into there and just no fill. And that'll be good. So pub, lish, oh wait, hold on. Pub, let's do 1 syllable at a time. That's what I have to tell my students. Pub, and then same thing. How many sounds do we hear in lish? And so then it was the same idea of we needed to pull I just Control C when I want things fast. I Control C, Control V. Ish. Okay, perfect. So then after we have that, then we're able to start looking at, okay, well, what says p? Great, now you can remind them that we just did this. That's what we did in the auditory drill. What says What says b? And we're just gonna move through just like that, and you can have them start to map on the letters to the sounds they hear. The reason we need to know how many syllables there are is so that we can figure out how many boxes we have. And the reason we need to know how many sounds is so that we can figure out how many individual letter tiles do we need. So that was helpful, because then when we started talking about ubble and ibble, I made him do this first. So if you have students who are really struggling with that mapping, have them do this intermediary piece. So you can do an intermediate piece there. It can be really, really helpful for your students. And then I would have him like, okay, great, now spell it. So now from memory, ideally, come back and spell it over here. And that was really helpful. Then what I do is for our word sorts, if I'm on a spelling day, I make them read each of these words. And then I have my decoding data. So even though it's not a reading day, I'm still getting reading data because I make them read these words before they can sort it. Then they need to go ahead and create their sentence. And so sometimes if we have to go all the way back for the spelling, and we need to go back to mapping each of our sounds out. Then when we look at combining, it can be really, really helpful to start to look at different sentence structure. So he read these sentences for me. So again, I can take a look at my sentence data. And he read, she must have been comfortable. She had a blanket and pillow. And so he gave me, she must have been comfortable because she had a blanket and pillow. Perfect. That's a perfect combination. This happened because of this, or this, we've got kind of that cause and effect there. So then I said, absolutely, you're absolutely right. If we want to use one of the conjunctions provided, we can use sentence number 2 first, and then get so. She had a blanket and pillow, comma, so she must have been comfortable. When we're combining sentences, this is a great opportunity to show where that comma goes. The comma goes wherever we're breaking the sentence. Whenever we got rid of a period, we need to put a comma in its place, as long as we're using one of these conjunctions. Now, sometimes if we start using because and things like that, we don't always need it, but it's a good opportunity to bring that up and do that explicit teaching in that moment. Sometimes we don't have time to do all of the dictation, and that's okay. You can decide, do you have one? If you have multiple students, allow one to do number one to do number 2, and one to do number 3. That's okay. That's totally fine. You can give them each screen control at different times, and that's perfect. Then for writing, we've had some questions about writing. So we gave prompts in the student workbooks, but you can also just use any prompt. It doesn't actually matter. So our sentence dictation was, is the table fixable? And so from there, because he had just written that sentence, I came up with, if something is broken, do you fix it or do you buy a new one? What do you do? And so I just allowed him to tell me your opinion. At this point, I'm typing it all. I'm not making him type it, I'm typing it because I don't necessarily always have time to focus on both pieces. So in my lessons, I type out their brainstorm for them. And typically what we would do is we would teach our students to use dictation to get their brainstorm ideas out. Because the first piece of writing is always brainstorming. There's content generation, and then there's the grammar mechanics editing piece. And so what you've noticed in our baseline, midpoint, and final assessments is that we've given you that opportunity to see, are they breaking down more in content generation or in the grammar and mechanics? Now, sometimes it measures like they're struggling with the content because they just couldn't get enough out. And that's okay, but that means that that's going to impact them in the classroom. And so we do need to be aware of the fact that how long it's taking them is impacting their content, whether or not that's what's coming from their mind or that's just because they can't get it out. So this is a good way to see if they can organize thoughts in their mind when they don't have to worry about getting it out. You're getting it out for them, but we need to organize it. So he was able to say, I think it's easier to just buy a new one. And so then I said, okay, well, what are your reasons? And so from there, he kind of said, well, like, you may not know how it broke. And so like, you don't really like, you may not know how it broke. Great, that was fine. So then reason number 2 was, sometimes the pieces can be more expensive than buying it new. Great. Then for number 3, he said, maybe you don't know how to fix it. But then what we realized is that was really more of an elaboration or more of kind of an example to reason number 1. And so I moved that over to reason number 1 and said, that's great, but then you need to give me a new reason because that's not really a distinct reason. That's kind of a detail, an elaboration to your first reason. So then he came up with, it might be out of date and would be better to get a newer model. Now this took a little bit of coaching because at first he was trying to give 3 different examples of 3 different things that could be easier to just buy new. And I had to keep kind of redirecting to, nope, we're talking about globally, anything at all. So these things are all great examples, but I need to know 3 ideas of why it's just easier to buy things new. Then after he did that, we're asking, is it a logical order? Like, does 1, then 2, then 3 make sense? Or do we move them around? Because we can move things around and that's easy peasy to just do that. He liked the order. So he said, nope, that's good. So in his opinion, the reasons were in a good order and didn't need to be changed. Now, sometimes I will coach or support that a little bit to say, well, I really like this reason, then this reason, and this reason, and this is why. So I'm just modeling for them why I like it. Then the question is, do any of them need an elaboration? So sometimes they'll give you something very concrete and it needs an example, like it needs a little something more. And so this is what I'm trying to coach. Does something need an extra piece? If I've got older students, they need elaborations. That's not acceptable to just have a sentence. You need the detail and then an example. It depends on the age of a student of whether or not they need it, but I'm coaching that. So if they say, nope, they don't need any elaborations, I might say, well, as a reader, I want a little bit more detail here. I want a little bit more detail here, and I'm just coaching that. Then after that, our order then is, then we need an intro, and we need a conclusion. We do not do this first. This is not a linear process that you write the first sentence, second, third, fourth, fifth, and you're done. This is you get your reasons, then you give your intro, then you give your conclusion, okay? And so you're just coaching through that. And then typically what I do is I just copy and paste it and put it back in the order. And so then I tell students, when you're brainstorming, especially if you're writing on the computer, this is not a lost process. So many students do not want to brainstorm because they do not want to go through the process of having to write out all of their ideas and then write it again. That just feels miserable to them. It feels miserable to us. And so what I say is, ideally, you can dictate your responses into kind of that brainstorm model, right? We've got reason 1, 2, 3. Then you add your intro to the top. You add your conclusion to the bottom. You can copy and paste. You can move things around. And then you add your transition words like first, next, finally. Okay. So that's what that looks like. And then you can do editing afterward. And so what I would do if we have it like this is we need to edit every sentence. Does every sentence have a capital? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Good, excellent. Does every sentence have good spaces? After we've checked all of them, then we're gonna say yes. Do they all have a punctuation? Yes. Do they all have good spelling? Yes. At that point, then I would tell students, great, if we're working in a Google Doc, we're not always working in slides like this. If we're working in a Google Doc, that's the point at which you can take them and put them all together by just deleting so that they all connect and you have one space and it's not 5 separate sentences, but you don't do it until then. So anyway, that's that. That's kind of just a quick overview of how you can add, how you can support, how you can look at different pieces. Again, keeping in mind, we don't get through this with every single student. And sometimes I have students who do a really good job. If I can help them with some of the brainstorming, then they do this for homework and they submit it back to me in a Google Doc. And that's perfect too. So it's, hey, I want you to write on this prompt. That's your homework. Then we're going to take a look at it for the next session. And so that may mean for the next session, we're not doing a new writing prompt, but we're reviewing and we're looking at the previous writing prompt. So anyway, that's just kind of a quick tip. Hopefully that helps. And let me know if you have any questions at all. Thanks, guys.